Namaste, everybody. Today we're going to talk about Jyotish or Vedic astrology. This is our second session. Pandit Atul Krishna is going to start with a beautiful mantra and then talk about Jyotish.
Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Okay, yes, we're recording now. So Jyotish means the science of light. It is about luminaries, the planets, the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. They all have different energies. They affect us in various ways. The planets have an effect on us, whether you believe in them or not. Something as simple as, have you seen what happens during a full moon? People act a little crazy. Their minds are affected. They will, they will do things they might not normally do. And it has even led to the expression of someone being moon mad. And of course, the very term lunacy comes from moon, because it was observed that when people had some instability, and we will say that there may be a vata disorder that sometimes is involved in various psychoses, people would be affected by the moon. Of course, the moon has an effect on water. All of the water on the planet is pulled by the moon. And the sun also has an effect energetically, on our digestion and fire. But the very important thing is that we have a karma, and our karma is coming from our past lives. And the time of our birth is not something that is by chance. We are born at the time when it's the right time for us to be born. And it means that the planets are in a position that they indicate things about our karma. This is a very important concept because Vedic astrology, Jyotish, is not about predetermination and predestiny. You can look at someone's chart and you can understand many things about that person and their nature and even different life events, but that's not going to be 100% who they are, because we are individuals. We have the ability to determine our actions. And most importantly, we have the ability to take up spiritual processes that are not under the purview of karma. The yoga process is, by definition, something that frees us from karma. That's what yoga really means. So this is a very long presentation. I'm not going to cover the whole thing. We're only going to go on for about 30 or 40 minutes. And I would like to try to give you an overview and basic understanding of some of the terms and concepts that we have. Some of the things in this presentation are a little technical, and I'm not going to get bogged down in those. I would like you to come away with this having a basic understanding of what are core concepts in Jyotish or Vedic astrology. So first of all, what's the overview? So Jyotish, you can say the science of light. It is really about the positions of luminaries, planets, sun, moon, stars. It is described, it is one of the Vedangas, one of the 6 limbs or appendices of the Vedas. It is accepted to be generally very ancient, as early as 3100 before the Christian era. Many of us consider it to be much older. It is a spiritual science. It's part of the Vedic way of life. Some of the key texts in Jyotish are Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra and the Jaimini Sutras. Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra is the main text that I follow as a Jyotishi, and My Jyotish Guru, Swami Raj Baldev, he also had a system of astrology called Sarjatik, and he also accepted the Parashara Rishi's Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. There are different divisions in Jyotish as well. There's Surya Siddhanta, Hora, and Samhita. Surya Siddhanta is really something that's used for calculating the times of eclipses. Now, why is it important to know the times of eclipses? Because from the Vedic perspective, eclipse is an unnatural event, and it is an event that we avoid doing auspicious activities. Eclipses are considered inauspicious. So it is said that a woman who looks at a solar eclipse, or who is exposed to the energy of a solar eclipse, it may cause a child to be born with a blemish, for example. Hora is the science of understanding the proper times for doing auspicious activities. And Samhita gives us a reference to how to interpret the natal chart. And the main theme is karma. So karma phala vipaka kala vidhanam. It is the effect of karma based on time as past actions come about. Jyotish gives us rules and it gives us guidelines, and we can understand when the things that we're going to get. So there's a basic core philosophy. Let me digress a little bit and talk about karma. Karma is the idea that our things that we get a certain amount of happiness and a certain amount of distress in this life. That is pretty much set. What we do get to do is to choose the form in which we receive our happiness and distress. And really, the amount of happiness that we get is not going to increase. So for example, somebody thinks, hey, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to, let's say I'm going to win the lottery and I'll have a lot of money and I'm going to enjoy life so much. Have you heard of stories of people who have won money and they've won $1 million and they ended up miserable and worse off than before? This is the action of karma, because they were destined to receive a certain amount of happiness, and the money brought them some happiness, but also an equal amount of distress with it. And then it was, their reaction to it was such that people do things. For example, they win the lottery, and then they sell the annuity, and then they get a bunch of cash and they spend it on lavish parties and buying boats and fancy cars and houses and properties. And then suddenly they realize, hey, I quit my job and I don't have money to maintain any of this, and I can't keep up payments, because it's human nature to want to get as much as we can get. But that's karma at work. It is karma. Karma is not an excuse for us to be lacking compassion, and quite the opposite. In fact, when we look at the karma that people are facing, we want to be very compassionate. As Ayurvedic practitioners, as Jyotishis, we want to be very compassionate and help people to deal with the results of their past activities, because karma is really all about lessons. It's really all about things that we've done in the past that are catching up to us. So we are always interacting, and we are interacting with tamogun, rajogun, and sattvagun. These are the modes of darkness, the mode of passion and action, and the mode of goodness. And this is where we initiate the seed of karma or action. We start with desire, and then we think about something, and then we do something, and this sows seeds of future effect. It can be a good effect if it is a good deed that we did. If it is a bad deed that has caused some pain or suffering, or has gone against what is a path of progress for humans, we will get a bad effect. So we are focused on the outcome and effect, but we forget about the reasons why we get the outcome. We don't remember the things that we've done in previous lives. It's very rare that we do. But Jyotish can give us some insight, and it can, give some insight. For example, I was indications are that I was a doctor in a previous life. I was also in another previous life, I was a landlord. I had a lot of money and a lot of property, but I was sometimes unfair in dealings with peasants, and so I have had to suffer sometimes. I have a yoga called Daridra Yoga. Daridra Yoga means that even if I have money, I still have the effects of poverty sometimes, and that is called Daridra Yoga. And of course, if somebody will run a chart and run a software that spits out a bunch of yogas, you really should not read too much into it, because a skilled Jyotishi will actually look at the chart and look at the yogas that are indicated in the chart and give you some understanding of how it is all blended together. Sometimes we have actions that bear fruit in one lifetime, and others may take it may come to us in the next life, or it may take multiple lives. So that's just all part of the human experience. So what is the Jyotish lineage? Vasishta was a great rishi, and he was the guru of King Dasharath of the Ramayana. Parashara was a great rishi who was the father of Vedavyas, who compiled the Vedic literatures. He was also he was said to have lived in about 3,500 to 2,500 years ago. And that is the version of history. Many of us believe it was closer to something like 5,000 years ago. He was a Maharishi, so he was a Vedic seer, and he was able to get extraordinary insight into reality. And he is the author of Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. So Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra is one of the most respected treatises on Jyotish. A quotation here given in English is that that good will come to those who are students, who are peacefully disposed, who honor their gurus and elders, who only speak truth and are God-fearing. One should not give this knowledge to someone who's unwilling, or to someone who has no faith in it, or to someone who has bad motives. So this is a very sacred and ancient knowledge, and we should honor and respect it. This is the idea. This is in general the way that we give Vedic knowledge, but it is particularly true of Jyotish. Jyotish is a divine knowledge, and it gives us the ability to have insights into the workings of Daiva, or fate. Meaning Daiva is how God and demigods are giving the results of our past karma. So it's not something that is to be touched without respect. Jaimini was a disciple of Parashara and a Mimamsa philosopher from Nepal. There are only 4 chapters left from the Jaimini Sutras. So let's look at some brief concepts from astronomy. Now, you're all familiar with signs of the zodiac. Anyone who's ever picked up a newspaper has seen that, right? You'll notice that there are tropical dates and sidereal dates. So, for example, Scorpio, October 23rd to November 21st. So, okay, I was born November 7th. That makes me a Scorpio, right? Well, no, not according to Jyotish. According to Jyotish, I have my sun in Libra. Now, that is one aspect of the chart. This is where the sun is. The sun has a fairly fixed movement throughout the year. It's a fairly predictable range of dates when the sun is in a particular sign. So the sidereal date is what we use in Jyotish. The tropical date is what Western astrology uses, and it follows the precession of the equinoxes. So some of the concepts in astronomy, you have the ecliptic. That's the apparent path of the sun's larger orbit. This is shown here in red. The zodiac is this, basically you have a circle divided in 12 divisions, and they are 30 degrees each. Each of these is a sign. It is also called by the Sanskrit term Rashi. The time is the measure for the planets to traverse through the zodiac. So we are able to do mathematical calculations and very precisely determine where planets are at a particular time. So it's typically someone will ask me for a consultation, and I'll tell them, I want to know your time, date, and place of birth, because where you are on the surface of the earth determines what the actual time is, and where the earth's rotation is, and where everything is according to this band of the zodiac surrounding the earth. So that's all determined by time. So we can calculate everything from time, date, and the place. So I usually say we like to get the time. If you tell me you're born at 9 a.m., I'm going to say, well, please try to check your birth certificate, because most people do not wait until 9 o'clock on the hour to come out. It might have been 9:05 or 9:03 or 8:57, and sometimes a few minutes can make a difference. I have looked at charts where it was literally 3 minutes to one side or the other would have made a difference. The person wasn't sure, and I could tell from the way the person, looking at the person's face, I could tell where the planets were. So I knew their time of birth accurately that way. So the tropical zodiac, we don't really deal with that. That's when the sign of Aries begins at the time of the vernal equinox. You notice Aries here in the tropical zodiac starts March 21st. So this is not what we're using in Jyotish. We're going with the sidereal, according to the position of fixed stars. So this is one difference between Jyotish and Western astrology. There are other differences as well, of course, but that's one. Now, another important concept in Jyotish is that Lord Vishnu has come in the form of the grahas: Surya, the sun; Chandra, the moon; Mangal, Mars; Buddha, Mercury; Guru, Jupiter; Shukra, Venus; Shani, Saturn; Rahu, and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu are shadow planets. They are the intersection of the moon's orbit around the earth, where it intersects the plane of the ecliptic. I know that sounds like a lot of, long words if you didn't study astronomy. Basically, they are imaginary points where the moon is crossing the imaginary plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. And Rahu and Ketu's position are important because when they join up with the moon, that is when you have lunar eclipses and solar eclipses. It's based on the position of Rahu and Ketu. So these 7 planets that we know about, and moon is considered a planet as well as sun from the perspective of Jyotish. They are all luminaries. And Rahu and Ketu also are given importance. So what is the relationship? I'm not going to go into detail with all this, but basically there's a connection between the different planets. The sun is related to our ego, our self-concept. Mercury is related to intelligence. Shani or Saturn is related to, it is the giver of karma. Moon is related to mind, especially. Mangal or Mars is our passions and our aggression and drive. If Mars is well positioned in someone's chart, that's the thing that usually indicates someone is making money. Guru or Jupiter indicates our religious or our sense of duty. And let's see, and Venus is Shukra. Venus is our sense of enjoyment of pleasures. Rahu and Ketu also have significance. Rahu usually is associated with fears and shadowy things. Ketu is associated with mysticism and other things of that nature. So there's also a concept of 120 years. 120 years is a figure that we use kind of as an ideal length of human life. And we use that for a system called Vimshottari Dasha. And Vimshottari Dasha literally means the periods over 120 years. And that we use to look at, based on the moon's position at the time you were born, we can get some indications of different phases of life that you go through. So there is also the concept of the Kala Purush, and this is these are just some general ideas that is coming from the Maharishi. And they have a particular way of understanding it, not particularly the way that we teach it, however, but it's a very good presentation. What are some of the terms that we use? So these are Sanskrit terms. The bhava is the house. You can think of the bhava as the condition or state of being or state of mind. So a planet is in one of 12 houses, first house through 12th house. For example, in my chart, I have Moon and Mars are in Gemini in the first house. That is also called the ascendant. And in Sanskrit, we also refer to the ascendant as the lagna. The first house reflects our physical appearance, the first impression that people get of us, and it indicates the face, and some other things as well. There are also, the houses are also divided up into various signs. So the houses 1, 5, and 9. No, Vimshottari Dasha doesn't have anything to do with the time before the next life. It's basically a framework. So let's say, for example, I was born in 1960, and at the time that I was born, I was just ending the Mars period, and I entered the Rahu period from about the age of 3. Now, during my Rahu period, it was a very difficult time for me, and I had a couple of childhood diseases. I had mononucleosis twice. That happened during my Rahu period. I suffered a lot of ridicule in school. I suffered, from depression. These are all things that are fairly typical in the Rahu period. It also led me to having somewhat of a disdain for mundane life, and that was part of what led me to take up residence in an ashram when I was still fairly young and still in my Rahu period. That's what these dashas or periods are. They are related. It's individual. It is all calculated individually based on the position of the moon at your time of birth, and it has meaning according to the position and aspects of the planets in your chart. So just to give that example, that hopefully gives you a better idea. The earth signs are 2, 6, and 10. This is also related to artha, or achievements. Air signs are 3, 7, and 11. And the water signs are 4, 8, and 12. The Rashi is the sign. So, for example, I said in my first house, the sign is Gemini or Mithuna in Sanskrit. Mithuna simply means the twins. It means, as it does in the Latin and Greek. So we look at, let's say I have Moon and Mars in the first house in Gemini. So Moon and Mars are two planets. They're in the first house, and my first house is in Gemini. Now, what does that mean? It will generally indicate Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Now, my Mercury is in the fifth house with a debilitated sun. So that indicates, it does indicate someone who has keen intelligence and good speaking ability, who also comes across as very passionate, sometimes a little intimidating to people. That's the combination of Moon and Mars together. It also means that there can be a tendency for the mental, to go off the rails a little bit, to go overboard somewhat. Those are things that can happen with that particular yoga. That is called the Chandra Mangala Yoga. But anyway, that's the that is the way that we look at things and the way that we talk about things. We talk about a particular Rashi or sign, which in this case is Gemini for those two planets. And I have Sun and Mercury are in Libra. Well, if you know the date of someone's birth, you could even look it up in this little chart here and look at the sidereal date and see, okay, November 7th. Oh, yes, that would be Sun in Libra. Other planets do not move quite so regularly as the Sun. It's the Sun that we can predict by a simple chart like that. For other things, we generally need to run software that can do all the calculations. I tell Manjulali, it's really not that hard to do it. It just requires a grasp of Newtonian physics and basic calculus, and how hard is that? It's really, but it's a little tedious. Some people think it's a bit hard. Anyway, there are 9 grahas. So we mentioned the Sun, Moon, Earth, Mercury, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and then Rahu and Ketu. They're called graha because it's something that has a hold of us. They have an influence on us. They are pulling us, and they are also indicating our path in life. 2 of these grahas are called chaya grahas. They eclipse through the shadow. There are also 11 upagrahas. These are things that are calculated. And there are some things that we use these upagrahas. We're not going to really go into that. But basically, graha is you can say that the graha is an archetype. There are many stories in Jyotish. You can read in the various Puranas and Srimad Bhagavatam. There are stories about Saturn, stories about the churning of the ocean, how Rahu was an asura who sat amongst the devas, and Bhagavan Vishnu came and cut off his head, but he had already drunk some of the nectar from the churning of the milk ocean, and so his head was immortal and it was separated from his body, and that is and there is also some enmity between Rahu, Ketu, and Sun and Moon. So there are many stories about Jyotish. It's a very deep topic, and again, we're just trying to give you an overview and introduction to these things. What are some of the other terms that we use? The Janma Rashi, or the birth sign. That is the sign in which the moon was in at the time of birth. Also, sometimes we talk about the ascendant. So, for example, I say my ascendant, my lugna, that's the part of the zodiac that was crossing the horizon at the time of birth. And that is also something that has to be calculated. It changes very quickly. The moon also happened to be in the first house. So my what we sometimes call Chandra Lagna. Chandra Lagna is when we make a chart with everything starting from the moon. In my case, it's exactly the same because my moon is in the first house. The Lagna is the ascendant or the rising sign. So it's the part of the zodiac that's crossing the eastern horizon when you were born. There are also 27 nakshatras. This is something that is unique to Jyotish. These are, they can be considered to be, I think you can use the term lunar mansions. These are constellations that the moon goes through. There's 13 and 1/3 degrees in each of these 27 nakshatras. And the signs are, they are also divided amongst the various rashis. There's also something called drishti. So for example, my moon is in a nakshatra called Aridra. Aridra means dry. And there are some characteristics of each one of these nakshatras. There's also drishti, the gaze or aspect of a graha, who is looking at whom and where. So for example, I'm giving another example from my own chart. So I have, let's draw something here. So here we go. And I'm just going to use the wheel chart. So we've got, that's really sloppy, isn't it? Well, that's a horrible drawing. But anyway, so here I've got Mars and I've got the moon. And I've also got in the 7th house, I've got Jupiter. And I've got Saturn. So these are giving an aspect, they're giving a direct aspect on that Chandra Mangal Yoga. Otherwise, the Chandra Mangal Yoga might make me more of a wild person. The combination of Jupiter and Saturn tends to produce a little bit more of a balance on the what could sometimes be the very wild and excessive tendency of having Chandra Mangal Yoga in the 1st house here. So this is called drishti, okay? It's the concept of where the planets are. They're looking at each other and they are giving each other their energy, and there's an exchange of energy. So when you look at someone's chart, and just to fill in a little bit more here, and then I've got the sun and I've got Mercury here in the 5th house, and let's see, who else? Venus is here in the 6th house, house of enemies. That's a little bit of a challenging place for it. Anyway, but the whole idea of drishti, you can see that it's a very complicated thing. We have to look at this. And it's a simple breakdown of planets in different houses and signs. You can't just run a computer program that spits out a bunch of text and tells you stuff. Yeah, you can do that, but it's going to be misleading because we have to weigh these things and they all come together in combination. Okay, it is like, you know, playing a chord on the piano. There's a lot of different notes that are involved, except that it's much more complicated than that. some of the planets are naturally benefic. They are Somya. So, for example, Jupiter is a Somya Graha. It is naturally gentle, as is Venus. Some are Krura. Mars is a Krura Graha. Sun is a Krura Graha. Saturn is a Krura Graha. And planets also have relationships. They can be friends, or they can be enemies, or they can be bitter enemies. So these are all things that are part of Jyotish, that are part of what we analyze. Okay, and now quickly, guys, I think I'm just about have run out of my time here. There is, so Agni, so fire, earth, space, water, and air are understood to be Mars is fire, Mercury is earth, Jupiter is space, Venus is water, and Saturn is air. So these are the tattvas, how the grahas are related to the Panchamahabhuta. Actually, the wheel chart is neither South Indian or North Indian. Normally, my preference is the North Indian chart style, which is a bit easier to draw. Basically, you make a square, and then you make another square circumscribed in it. So this is the North Indian style chart. I personally I usually use the North Indian style chart rather than the wheel chart or the South Indian style. So that's the North Indian style chart. And here, this is the ascendant is up here. Always up at the top. And then you have here down the 7th house, the house of marriage. This would be the 5th house and the 9th house. So these are the trines. But yeah, that's what I normally use for presenting charts. So you can choose whichever works better for you according to if you're going to study astrology, Jyotish seriously. I just want to end quickly with talking a little bit about some of the things that planets are associated with, some of the things that they are associated. So Surya is the sun, representing the Atma, the self, influence, prestige, power, father, king, royalty. Chandra is moon. It's our subconscious, our intuition, our understandings, inclinations, emotions, our sleep, happiness, good name and fame, our mother, royal favor. It can also involve fluids, lymph, and watery fat. Mangal, or Mars, represents our stamina, courage, desire, anger, scandal, diseases, enemies, oppositions, controversies, weapons, aggression, inflammation. Pitta. Mars is definitely a Pitta planet. If we see Mars in a difficult position, it could indicate that there's an issue with Pitta that is related to the Jyotish. So we can deal with karmic issues that way and understand when there may be a karmic issue involved. Buddha, or Mercury, is involved in intelligence, discrimination, speech, expression, education, learning, mathematics, logic, astrology. So for example, having the Gemini ascendant and having the moon and Mars together is definitely something that gives someone proficiency in computer science, mathematics, and astrology. Guru, or Brihaspati, is heavy. It's the planet of wisdom, learning, corpulence, acts of religious merit, devotion to God, ancestors, holy places, scriptures, proficiency in learning and philosophy. Shukra, or Venus, involves spouse, sexual matters, sensual pleasure, singing, poetry, scents, ornaments, jewelry. Saturn called Shani or Shanishchara, is involved in longevity, life, death, adversity, calamities, disrespect, disease, poverty, livelihood, servility, unrighteous conduct. Shani is a very interesting planet. It's not that well understood because sometimes people think of Saturn as the planet that brings us difficult and challenging things. If Shani is well placed, Saturn will give us the life lessons that make us wise. And if Shani is well placed, Shani will also indicate someone who will have a long life. Rahu is related to fallacious argument, harsh speech, gambling, lying, movement, traveling, outcasts, foreigners, theft. Ketu is involved in giving trouble to enemies, horned animals, philosophy, salvation, and mysticism. Definitely if someone has psychic abilities, we would see some indication with the placement of Ketu, or it might align with the Ketu Mahadasha. So that is really, I think, as much time as I have to cover these. We can continue this as we in the next session. Before I close, any questions here on any of this? I know this is a lot of information. It might seem a little overwhelming. Please read the information that's on there. We have a lot of information, a lot of articles, a lot of things that you can read there on the LMS, and that will, I think, help you. Maybe the first time, maybe not, maybe the second time, not so much. Maybe the third time or the fourth time you go through some of this, it will start making a little bit more sense. And you can also, start making a list of issues. Yeah, I'm also available to do that. I have been promising that for people for months, and I'm really behind. I'm going to start getting caught up and do some basic consultations for our students. There's definitely a lot of interest in that, and it can be very interesting and revealing. So all right, well, I'm going to end there, and thank you very much. I'm going to just stop the recording and see what else we have. I believe that's it, but I'm just going to check, so bear with me just 1 minute.